All right, hello. Um, okay, I'm super nervous. Let us get started. Like very shaky. That's not what I want to do. Can I share the screen? Oh, am I? Oh, okay. There we go. That's the view I wanted. Hello, my name is Molly, and today I will be discussing communication disorders. Thank you all for coming to this in-service. These are a few of the disorders I will be going over today, and then I will be talking about some tips for working with ELL students, as well as supporting families. So I'm going to start off with stuttering, and we all know what stuttering is. Sometimes it's called stammering, getting caught up on your words or sounds of your words. Sometimes it sometimes it also includes a pause, an inability to restart for a period of time, a couple seconds, maybe, sometimes longer. So causes of stuttering can be traumatic brain injury or traumatic life events, but oftentimes it's unknown. It can be first caught onto when a child is around 2 years old or starts speaking. You can hear the stuttering and the repetitive sounds and articulations. As the use of language occurs, it requires the brain to operate at kind of a higher level or at an increased capacity, and sometimes the motor skills don't keep up, and this can cause a lag, if you will, and then stuttering can occur. I've included some resources. I will put this all in an email and send it out to all of you after this, but I have the National Stuttering Association and the Stuttering Foundation. I myself looked through both of those websites and found specific parts of or tabs and parts of the website that were specific to educators and teachers, and they had great resources and tips on there. So for each of the disorders I'm going over today, I'll be referencing phonology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, just to give you guys a quick overview of what those are. Phonology is sounds and production of sounds, so all of the individual sounds it takes to make a word. Syntax is the arrangement of words in a sentence and knowing where those nouns and verbs and pronouns and adjectives and how those all fit together to make a sentence. Semantics is words and their meanings. For example, the word fall, you don't know what I mean by that until I give you the sentence. I had a big fall on the ground versus last fall I graduated. So that's kind of an example of semantics. Pragmatics, also an example of that could be understanding. If I say, hey, can you crack the door or crack the window over there? You know not to put a crack in the window, you know to open it to a crack. So kind of understanding those different ways language is used. What you'll see in the classroom for students who stutter can be withdrawn socially and also academically, and kind of apprehensive to collaborate and contribute in class. This can be due to anxiety about their stuttering. So some strategies you can use to effectively teach these students are to set communication expectations for the whole class. You don't want to just single out that one student and say, hey, when you're talking to so-and-so over there, make sure you talk like this. You're going to want to make it kind of a classroom rule for everyone, apply to everyone, universal. And that would just be teaching communication etiquette, turn taking when talking, do not interrupt, don't speak for somebody else, like interrupt and try to finish their sentence, and cease all other activities when speaking to someone else. It can be distracting if you're messing with something while you're having a conversation. So just setting those proper conversation etiquette for the whole class can be an effective strategy. Also allow for one-to-one interaction. This can allow for practice in becoming more confident in communicating for those students. Sometimes they are more reserved in speaking, so they have less practice getting their ideas across with less familiar people than their family. like classmates and teachers and um, school individuals. So also accommodate for public speaking. You're going to want to make a plan with the student before an assignment for public speaking occurs, and making a plan with the student rather than telling them, hey, like this is the accommodations or anything like that. It will always be more effective to work with them and get their ideas, and if they want a heads up on things, if they're okay without it, if I'm planning a group discussion, I can give them some sentence frames beforehand, like if that's a strategy they like to use. It's just trial and error for accommodating for that. So here's like a Common Core standard and then a literacy strategy that you can use with it. And this is, the standard is to build on others' talk and conversations by responding to them. And so a teacher may typically practice this in group settings, but you're going to want to do this one-to-one with students for stuttering while they build up their confidence in speaking and providing those multiple exchanges, just because they may be more apprehensive to speak in the first place. Sorry about that. Okay, the next is Fragile X syndrome. And this is a genetic condition and it causes intellectual disability, which can be mild to moderate to severe. And here's a YouTube video, just because this is a little bit more of a rare condition. Some people have never heard of it before. It's always good to provide an example. Okay, so as you can see in that video, there's a wide spectrum, kind of like the first individual shown seemed less verbal, and then you can see it's just a spectrum. There is more and more verbal ones in here. Oh, sorry, verbal individuals. What? I'm sorry. Okay, so what Fragile X syndrome, how it occurs is a genetic mutation on the X chromosome, and what happens is it, I think it like affects a protein that's developed or a protein that's responsible for brain functioning. Um, and oftentimes, not often, but it can co-occur with autism spectrum disorder. I think I read that it can be around 30% of individuals with Fragile X also have autism. There are some physical characteristics like large foreheads and elongated ears that you can kind of see sometimes. And these individuals often experience learning disabilities. They have sensory needs. There's different attention deficits that present and motor deficits as well. This is diagnosed and found with a blood test. I have two resources listed right here, and just like the other resources, these ones also had specific tabs for teachers or educators, like specific sections of the website dedicated to that. So I thought that was great. The impact on language would be for everything, it usually is delayed. Sometimes it is delayed and then develops at a somewhat typical rate and like a typical pattern to peers. And sometimes it is delayed and there's severe deficits and they may be nonverbal or only speak one word utterances at a time, like only have a handful of words they know and only speak one word at a time. But as you saw in the video, sometimes it develops almost completely normally to typically developing peers. So their syntax, if it does continue developing, syntax skills are typically very impaired. I just want to reference that video though and be mindful that this is a spectrum and can occur differently across the population of individuals with Fragile X. With syntax, less complex sentences and fewer utterances are often observed, and they do face immense difficulties and deficits in semantics, and then pragmatics is probably most affected and most hard for them to grasp as it is a very complex thing. So behaviors can be wide ranging. They can be almost indistinguishable from peers, or they can have aggression similar to what you would see in autism, elopement, refusals. They can have sensory sensitivity and anxiety. But as you saw in the video, I also want to point some positive behaviors out. They are often very happy and social and friendly, and they can be outgoing and a lot of fun to be around. So effective classroom strategies would be for those students with more significant behavior issues would be to have a positive behavior intervention plan. And that is just so there's consistent reactions and consistent expectations set across the board, across all teachers and parents, so the student can start to learn to replace those negative behaviors with more functional ones. Token boards can be important to help keep their motivation and interest. They know that they're working towards something, as they're less intrinsically motivated than typically developing peers. And to be giving them frequent breaks or opportunities for breaks. If they don't take it, that would be great, but definitely giving those the a frequent opportunity. So a common core standard is to speak audibly and express thoughts, feelings, and ideas clearly. For those individuals that have less of a grasp on language, I would definitely allow for visual expression and mood boards. How do you feel today? And they can point it out on a mood board would be ideal. The next is generalized anxiety disorder, which most of you are familiar with anxiety, and it's just that severe and persistent fear and worry. And what makes it what makes it classified as a disorder rather than just the natural anxiety that people have would be that it interferes with daily functioning. This can occur due to differences in brain functioning and neurotransmissions. It can also develop after like traumatic events or bad home life situations, but that is not always the case, and that is not something to be assumed. It can develop based on a lack of certain neurotransmitters or an excess of them in the brain that are caused maybe genetically or for unknown reasons. Here are also 2 more resources you can look into. Again, they have specific sections for teachers to look through. So phonology and phonetics typically develop at a normal rate to peers. Depending on the level of anxiety somebody has, they may be delayed. Syntax, so these students make fewer utterances than peers, meaning they speak less just because of that anxiety. So, so because of that, their syntax is delayed, but once they start speaking, it progresses at a typical progression to peers. So they may express less semantic variations, simpler sentences, and depending on the child. Sorry, I lost my place there for a second. Sometimes they have limited attention just because anxiety can be very intrusive. So that attention can cause delays across the board, and it can be different levels of severity per student. Pragmatic delays can occur, but the students often catch up. Some contacts may be missed due to difficulty focusing, like I just said. Okay, so behaviors you'll see with students with anxiety is also occur in a wide variety. Students can be withdrawn and they may have trouble focusing, which can cause not only language, just academic delays and difficulties in class and school, paying attention. Sometimes they're highly reactive and disruptive. They act out a lot due to high anxiety. Some strategies you can use is a guided breakdown of assignments. And I would do this with the whole class because it's a good skill to learn for everybody instead of just singling out that one student. If it becomes something they need more frequently, maybe you can do it one-to-one on them, but definitely something with those bigger assignments to do with all students, which would be a guided breakdown of assignments. So saying, like at the end of the week, you need to have 20 pages read with mom and dad or something like that, and help them break that down. Like that means 5 pages a night or whatever that breakdown is, or if it's going to be a bigger assignment, like putting together an about me book or a worksheet, rather than other students might just be able to follow step by step in the classroom. But these students may need like a visual breakdown of what to do, just allowing to break assignments down into smaller pieces for them to cause less anxiety about the final product. And also frequent opportunities for breaks, and then check-ins on assignments to make sure that they're not just blowing it off or not doing it, or like sorry. Very nervous, but we're almost there. Okay. So giving those check-ins on assignments to make sure they're following that guided breakdown schedule instead of just getting completely lost and overwhelmed with anxiety and giving up altogether. So as a Common Core standard would be to build on others' talking conversations by responding to the comments of others through multiple exchanges. So a teacher may typically observe this in group settings or like in a reading group, or if you pull 5 students to do stations or something like that, you may want to do this, give them opportunities to work one-on-one with the peer and observe it that way, or even before observations, allowing them to practice one-on-one with the peer will help reduce anxiety a lot of times. Also sentence frames and allowing them to, well, I guess sentence frames would be more work better in a different, with a different standard possibly, but prompting a student to speak rather than them spontaneously doing it themselves or initiating it may help them because they may not feel comfortable speaking without that prompt. Okay, so the next communication disorder I will be talking about is hard of hearing. This video, as you can see, is called Deaf People Answer, but this is more the deaf community, which can include individuals who are hard of hearing. Okay, so I just wanted to show like how big of a misperception there is about the deaf community and hard of hearing individuals out there, um, to see those questions. And it's just funny to see their response and their personalities shine through their responses. So hard of hearing is a hearing loss, but they have enough hearing ability to process speech with assistive technology like FM transmitters, hearing aids, implants, stuff like that. So this can be caused by genetics or by illnesses or by prenatal toxin exposures. or just perinatal conditions like fluid buildup, and communications occur often due to lack of exposure to the English language, due to parents knowing that they're deaf or hard of hearing. Here's 2 more resources for you. This one is the National Organization for Special Education Teachers. They have a subsection in there for individuals with hearing impairments. So phonology is, well, all of them are typically delayed a year or more, but then once they do begin to develop, they develop in a similar structure or pattern than hearing individuals. So individuals with more significant hearing loss may not develop proper syntax. Well, they can, but like if they know ASL first, it's different. Sentence structure is much different, so it may be delayed or harder. They may have deficits in that area. Semantic skills are delayed, but they're more likely to develop normally. And pragmatics are delayed and often remain delayed or just different. But children who are hard of hearing often develop manual language or gestures. This can be ASL or just a series of gestures that their family knows. So they can exhibit a variety of different behaviors in the classroom. There can be signs of struggle just because they are delayed across so many areas of language. It could look like refusal to participate, withdrawn socially and academically, limited engagement, high anxiety. So some effective classroom strategies would be to teach the whole class conversation etiquette, similar to the first disorder we looked at was just teaching conversation etiquette across the board to everybody. So that would be face the speaker, limit multitasking, don't cover your mouth, because often reading lips is something they don't solely rely on, but they do rely on to a degree. Excuse me. Use available technology, speech to text. If they're hard of hearing and they are speaking, then that speech to text technology can be awesome. For written assignments, allow the speech to text or ASL to shape their writing, kind of scaffolding, because the use of formal written English language and getting those sentence structures down onto paper can be more difficult than just speaking. So here's a Common Core standard. And I think that this needs to be worked on in smaller settings in order to practice pragmatic skills that are delayed. They need to get those foundations of language down, and this may need to be practiced a lot. So encouraging practice at home for sure, but allowing for that in the school day is necessary too. So our last disorder that we're looking at is autism spectrum disorder. And this is a developmental difference characterized by social, communication, behavioral, and learning difficulties. And it is a spectrum. It can be almost unrecognizable in somebody, or it can be very apparent for different reasons. The cause is unknown. I do not believe it to be vaccinations. It can be hereditary, or hereditary factors are at least suspected. And like I said, it is truly a spectrum. It can involve delays across the board, or it can be just sprinkled throughout, and otherwise they're typically developing. It can be they just need support for a couple of months with early intervention, and then they're excuse me, on track and with their typically developing peers. Here are 2 resources out there you can look into. So phonology is often typically developing if they are an individual who is speaking. There are nonverbal individuals with autism. It just depends on the person. They can be completely nonverbal and sometimes not even grasp the use of an AAC device, and sometimes they're typically developing. Syntax, if they are an individual who is speaking and developing language in their younger years, they will have difficulties with pronouns oftentimes, or have a simple or rigid sentence structure that they always stick to. These individuals can be very literal and struggle with semantics. For example, I was working with a child with autism, and they understood the phrase checking out to be at a store. And I was working with them over here, and individuals were working over there. And I said, "Hey, do you want to go?" He was like peering over there. I said, "Do you want to go check it out? Should we go check it out and see what they're doing?" And he said, "Check it out? We're not at a store." So difficulties with semantics can be there. Like I said, they can be very literal. Children with autism can be very socially withdrawn and not have that eye contact and not have any interest in interacting with peers. And sometimes they can be social. It really depends. A spectrum. So if you're looking at somebody with more significant behaviors of autism, they can be aggressive or have refusal or have avoidant behavior and have those lack of social skills. And oftentimes you'll see stimming, which is just sensory input and is often harmless. Effective classroom strategies would be a visual schedule, definitely important. And that would be for like the whole day, going from like their morning routine, also breaking down into simple tasks like lunchtime. You walk over here, you get your lunch bag from here, you sit down at this table, just breaking it down even further. Token boards can be helpful and motivating, and offering those frequent breaks to avoid just mental overload. So this is a Common Core standard that I found, and I thought it was fitting because it benefits individuals with autism benefit from routine and structure. So like a literacy strategy could be writing down those rules and providing visuals for rules of a conversation, rules of group time, rules of story time, or so on. And then this quote says, "Autism is not a disability, it is a different ability." And that is so true. Autisms are not, I often don't see them as disabled, and I don't think that is a good description of them, but differently abled is a good description of them. And I think that occurs, or that concept applies to all of the communication disorders. So here are 5 ELL tips. Visuals are vital. If they don't have a full grasp of the English language, visuals will help them out and can help fill in some of those gaps. Assistive technology, scaffolding in native languages, and then using translation technology to help them start to build what they're trying to say in English, like for writing assignments. Extra one-on-one time to communicate to help. That will help give them the practice to develop the foundations of language, just because they don't have those English language skills yet, so they need all the practice they can get. Sentence frames for multiple, those can be applied across multiple assignments. And then PECS and AAC for those individuals with communication disorders that are more pervasive. And some ideas for family support is communication. For those individuals who are nonverbal or have very little use of communication skills, parents are at a loss and don't know how to respond to their student when they get home. Well, they know how to respond, they're their parents, but they don't know what their day was like, so they don't understand the behaviors as well. If they had a really bad day at school and if the student had a bad day at school and it's written in a communication log, the parent can be more patient or understanding, or just be more aware and ready to implement those coping skills, ready to implement a positive behavior intervention plan, any of those things. And it'll just help give more knowledge to what's going on in their school day, because they can't really check in and just be like, "Hey, how was your day at school?" So that communication is key. And then consistency to help replace those negative behaviors, those maladaptive behaviors with functional ones, you're going to want every adult to respond to those poor behaviors in the same way. So the student has an expectation and it is clear that if this happens, this happens. So it'll help them shape that behavior into more functional ones. And a behavior intervention plan is key for that. And giving the support to the family to know how to implement that strategy and what that, or those strategies on the behavior intervention plan and what that looks like. And the importance of practicing language at home, those daily one-on-one talks really gives them more practice and can help develop more understanding of those aspects of language. Teachers can offer a little bit of education on state support. So if a child gets on the PUNS list for a state, that's like a waiting list for state funding. And once they get approved, they get state funding, which can allow for respite care for their children, for therapies for their children. It can just give a lot of funding to provide a lot of awesome resources that cost money for those children that they wouldn't necessarily give the funds to unless they had that state funding, and then they can just have a very rich support system. And also to boost cultural competence. So if you're going to want to, if you're supporting an ELL family, you're going to want to be culturally competent. You're going to want to know how to interact with them appropriately, professionally, friendly, all of that. And you don't want to come across as having any unintended racism or unintended negative. You don't want them to perceive you negatively just because you're ignorant on something. So you're going to want to be competent in that. And there's often people you can talk to within your district to do that. So those are my tips for family support. There's a lot of resources out there to look into all of these different communication disorders, and I'll be sending this PowerPoint to you, and if you have any questions, you can reach out. Thank you so much for coming to my in-service, and I believe that you guys all are very capable of serving all of your students that you will encounter.